Welcome to Refuge Freedom Stories, brought to you by Refuge Ministries Canada. For the next half hour, your hearts will be filled with hope as you hear real-life stories of people who have been changed by the power of God. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Refuge Freedom Stories. I'm your host, Johnny T., and today my guest is Wesley Farnsworth. Wesley served 15 years in the U.S. Air Force as a professional photographer and public affairs specialist, documenting everything from presidential inaugurations to war zones and major sporting events. After leaving the military, he built a career in branding, design, and communication, earning 2 master's degrees and helping organizations clarify their message and connect with people in meaningful ways. However, Wesley also lived a double life, battling addiction, anger, and a broken sense of identity. Wesley, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Johnny, for having me. It's good to be with you today.
It's awesome to have you here. First and foremost, sir, let me thank you for your service. I'm highly respectful of veterans and those who currently serve, and you deserve all the praise for all that you've done in service for your country. So God bless you for that.
I appreciate that.
You know, you had quite a distinguished career in the military, but let's back up a little bit and let's talk about your journey of faith. Was faith something that you grew up with, or was that something that developed over time? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, my faith has been something that has been with me as long as I can remember. I grew up as a pastor's kid, or a evangelist's kid, if you want to be specific. Yeah. My dad was a full-time evangelist, which is essentially a traveling pastor, if you are not familiar with the term. So I grew up in the church. My mom was involved in ministry in many different ways. So being in church and being involved in ministry and having a relationship with God has been something that has been a part of my life since day one.
Oh, that's a blessing. I mean, not everybody can say that. I can't say that. But what a thing to be blessed to grow up in a Christian environment like that. So you would have seen, as you mentioned, God moving in fantastic ways through salvations and potentially other things like healings and deliverances and so on, being an evangelist as well. Was that not a desire in your heart to follow into that path, not as a career, but as a calling? Was that something that you struggled with when you were growing up because you decided to take a different route and ended up in the military? How did you kind of work through that process?
Yeah, no, that was the furthest thing from my mind. I didn't have any desire to follow in my dad's footstep and be an evangelist, which is kind of funny because my dad's dad was a pastor and my dad was a pastor and then became an evangelist. And so you could say it runs in the family, but it was not something that I had ever wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew that that wasn't necessarily it. Kind of through a roundabout way, I found myself in the military recruiter's office one day, and the rest is kind of history. The one correction I would say is I actually only served 7 years in the Air Force, but then I worked for the Air Force for another 8 years after that as a civilian, doing the same job. So it was a total of 15 years combined.
So what's the most memorable thing of that career in the military that really kind of spoke to your heart as you were photographing it or doing other graphic type things with it?
Yeah, I was blessed to do so many cool things while I was in the Air Force and tell so many amazing stories. You know, everything from telling the stories of World War II veterans. There was one gentleman I talked to that jumped in behind enemy lines on D-Day, and I was able to talk and interview him and photograph him. And what an amazing story it was just hearing him share his stories, you know, and then photographing everything from a presidential inauguration to my time in Afghanistan to sporting events at every level. I mean, just so many opportunities that I was very blessed to be presented with to document while I was in uniform.
A firm believer that God gives us gifts and talents and abilities when He creates us for specific reasons. So we helped you develop those in the military, and then you moved into a secular career using those same talents and abilities and built on those to help other churches as well and faith communities and so on and so on. Do you see a big difference in the way that those talents and abilities are looked at in the secular world versus the Christian environment?
I don't know that it's necessarily looked at differently. I think the skill sets are looked at the same way in terms of what they bring. I think they're just utilized differently. And even then, they're utilized based on the company's objectives. I mean, just like they would be in the military. So it's very interesting, you know, seeing how things are utilized in the civilian sector versus the military, and then how that even varies company to company.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody has their own priorities and key performance indicators and so on that they want to meet, right? Yeah, so they're going to push towards those however they can. Now, you were raised in a Christian home and your faith was part of your life, But as we said in the intro, something came up and you started to battle some things.
Yeah.
That's not unusual in this world. You and I are both podcasters and we interview a lot of people that have different issues in their life, whatever those might be. And typically they would kind of creep in. It's not that like all of a sudden you go from light to darkness, overnight type of thing. The devil's smart. He knows, so you're not going to go and do this gigantically bad thing. But to get you there, he'll start you with something real small. Yep. So how did things begin to unravel in that area for you? If everything was going really well, from what I understand, in your career after the military and so on, and you were making a lot of success in those areas. So what tripped you up with that?
Yeah, the unraveling actually started way back in my teen years, before the military, before everything, because I was a people pleaser. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to do everything I could to make sure that I was being the type of person that I thought the other person wanted me to be, so that I would not only be accepted, but that I would reflect positively in my own eyes on my parents and on my church and on God, and all those types of things. And so I just had this desire to fit in. And I think most people probably have that desire to some extent, but that ended up being the start of the unraveling. I was out with some friends one day and one of them mentioned a term that I had never heard before. And that night I came home and did some research to try and figure out what that was. And that opened up the world of pornography to me. And the rest, as you say, is history. And it ended up becoming a addiction that I would struggle with for many, many years.
It's interesting when you say that, because if we think back to Genesis, what did the serpent do? He asked the question, he planted a thought. Did God really say? And so on and so on. And like you said, the rest is history. And that's something that we see a lot, is that he likes to challenge us and to draw us away through this questioning that he uses, as slippery as it is. And if we think about Jesus, what did Jesus do? Jesus asked a lot of questions himself. And we know that the devil's a counterfeiter. So it's interesting that you present it that way. Now, you also found your way back to God through faith and community and a willing to be honest, and God started rebuilding your life along those lines. How did he begin to reveal himself to you so you could really understand? Because I kind of think that you said you didn't want to be a pastor's kid, or you didn't want to be an evangelist or a pastor like your lineage here had been over the many generations. So there would potentially be some kind of barrier of maybe not understanding God's personal interaction on a level that would draw you towards that. And maybe there was some space there between the two of you. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So how did God bridge that gap again to you? How did he start to pull the scales off your eyes and show you that he really was who he said he was and you could trust in him?
Yeah, I would say that I trusted in him all along. I never doubted him or his abilities or anything along those lines during the season of everything. It was more so my own stubbornness, my own desire to have the control over everything and do things on my own terms, by my own plan, that was keeping me where I was. And I didn't know that that's what it was. I mean, I was living life, but now, of course, hindsight is 2020. So it really just kind of took me realizing that, I've tried to quit this thing for so long and I've had no success, that something has to change. And it was around that time that my church brought in this ministry to the church called Celebrate Recovery. And at first I was like, well, that's not for me, right? It's recovery is for drugs and alcohol. But then I found out that, hey, this ministry is for anything and everything. If you're alive and breathing, you're qualified and can benefit from it. And so I went and checked it out. And it was through checking it out that I found that, hey, you know what, there is a path forward, and you just have to be willing to work the steps and work the program. And most importantly, you have to be willing to give it to God and allow him to do the work. And so with the help of the program and with God's help, most importantly, I've been able to do that. And now I'm celebrating victory from it.
God is always faithful to us. When we move towards him, he'll move towards us, right?
He absolutely is.
Yeah. And it's interesting too that addiction is addiction. It's addiction. It doesn't matter what the addiction to is. The process of addiction is the same. And
Yeah.
the victory also is the same, starting with surrendering that to God and letting him actually begin to change the individual from the inside out.
Yep, it absolutely is. And that's what I love about it is when you get involved in a ministry like this and you begin to hear other people share their stories, you begin to hear parts of yourself in their story, and they're talking about something that you've never been through. You know, like I can have somebody up there talking about their journey through alcoholism. I've never battled alcoholism, but I can relate to parts of their story because while the symptom is different, the root causes are often pretty close to being the same in some way, shape, or form. And you can see yourself in a lot of their journeys too. So it's always rewarding and so fun to see and hear people's stories of the things that they've been through and how they've gotten to where they are in victory, because you can either identify yourself in part of their story or you can learn something from their story to better yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it builds us precept upon precept upon precept. So each one of those little precepts in somebody else's life can be a building block for your own recovery, right?
Absolutely.
And you talk about stories because I know that you said it in two pieces, but when you put them together, I think it really hits home. You said that stories matter.
Yeah.
And if you add the other that you said about that was honest stories create real change. So stories matter. And if they're honest, they'll create real change. You talked a bit about podcasting and some of the people that you've interviewed, some of the guests you've interviewed, and so on. How have you seen results through those stories that are presented? I know you've written a couple of books, and we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But as you've interviewed these guests who shared their stories, you said it's impacted your own heart in certain ways. What kind of feedback are you getting from your podcast about the stories that you're presenting and how people have gone through different journeys?
Yeah, that's the fun thing I love about podcasting and having the guests on. Every time I hit record, somebody is sharing their story about the ways that God has worked in their life and the things that they have gone through. And every single one presents a unique angle or a unique part of their story, but yet at the same time, it's also similar in some ways. And it's fun to hear because I get to not only hear the struggles that they've been through, but I get to celebrate with them in the way that God has helped them through things. And then hearing feedback from people that are listening to the podcast that are like, man, that was such a good story. I got so much from that. It's so awesome to hear because everyone's like, man, you have to be raking in the money doing podcasts. And I'm telling you, you don't make money doing podcasts. If anything, you spend money. But it is so rewarding to hear people's feedback on episodes and to hear feedback from the guests after we're done. But man, I had one guest, I remember they were sharing something and they literally stopped in the middle of sharing. And they said, I had never thought about what I shared the way that I just shared it. I just never thought about it that way. Now it's got me thinking about other things. And so we can share a story 1,000,000 times. And then one time we're going to say something slightly different and it's going to unlock something and it's going to start another journey of self-reflection. And so it's just fun to be on a journey like that.
Yeah, I love how the Holy Spirit just kind of every now and then it'll just grab you by the scruff of the neck and say, hey, guess what? And it's amazing. I agree with you 100%. And there is just it's such a blessing and an honor to sit in this side of the chair and get to interview people like yourself and others that are willing to share their honest stories. I 100% agree with you on that. And I think it's important that we don't focus on the metrics, but really for us as Christian podcast hosts, the true measure, and this is how I see it for myself, is that when I get to heaven, one person comes up to me and says, you know what? I heard your podcast with so-and-so, and I gave my heart to Jesus. To me, that's the bottom line. That's the only thing that really matters.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I, like any podcaster, I do track my metrics and I try and do things that are going to increase my reach, obviously, because the more people that hear it, the more positive influence I feel like I can have. But that's not the bottom line. The bottom line is pointing people back towards Christ. And like you just said, if even one person can get something away from the podcast, then everything that I've done is worth it.
Yeah, and he wants us to use all of the tools that he's given us to expand his kingdom. We'll be accountable when we get there for the talents that we have. Did we bury them? Did we get 30-fold? Did we get 100-fold? So on and so on.
Yep.
And part of the gifting that God's given you is to be able to write. So you've written a couple of books. Your first one is The Blueprint of Becoming, Practical Guide to Faith, Failure, and Finding Your Way Forward. And you have another one in the works, from what I understand, called When Faith Meets Fire. So
I do.
let's talk a little bit about those. What birthed that passion to get that first book done?
Yeah, the first book was a long time coming. That started back 2019, 2020, I would say, is about when I probably started writing it. And really, it started with just my personal testimony that I wrote as a part of Celebrate Recovery. And then as time went on, God just kind of started opening up things, that spurred it forward. And then ultimately, through many starts and stops and a long road, it was finally published in October of 2025. And it's just been so cool because in the book, I not only share my personal testimony, but I share stories of people that were used by God in the Bible that if you and I ran into them on the street today, we would likely say, hey, you're not qualified. Right. And God said, well, you're right. They aren't qualified, but they're qualified in my eyes. And they said, yes. And so I'm going to use them. And they're big names, like people that you would be like, what? He did that. And he got what, And so we look at some of those things. And then we look at throughout the book, we do inward reflection on our own lives and figure out things in our lives that are there, that are keeping us from walking the blueprint that God has for our lives and keeping us from becoming the person that he wants us to be. So I walk through different things that you can do to do that kind of a reflection. And then ultimately, I also provide a chapter on things that you can do to begin to correct and alter your course so that you are navigating life and walking in the blueprint that he has for you.
Yeah, it sounds like a great read. And your second book that you're working on, When Faith Meets Fire, let's talk a little bit about that. What inspired that?
This one was kind of very unplanned. I have a few others that I'm working on, but this one was kind of last year as I was going through a 9-month unemployment spurt. And it was during that spurt while I was putting out my first book that I kept getting the same question over and over and over again, and statements over and over and over again about my personal faith and asking, how do I have the kind of faith that I have while I'm in the middle of the fire, while I'm, in the middle of this season of 9 months of unemployment? How am I not losing my mind in worry and fear and all these other things? And so When Faith Meets Fire is kind of a self-reflection a little bit, share a little bit more of my stories, some stories that I don't share in the first book. Some I do repeat a little bit of, but it kind of is an insight as to how my faith got to where it is today. And it's an encouragement to you that, hey, you know what, even if your faith may not be exactly where mine is, because mine's not perfect, right? I'm still a broken person in a broken world. I still have lots of things to figure out, but it's just kind of meant to be an encouragement and to let you know that, hey, just because you're in the middle of a fire, just because things aren't going the way that you want them to be, that doesn't mean that God has left you and he's there for you and he will be with you. And so it's an encouragement and is meant to help you look for ways to be able to see God in your life. And again, make sure that you're walking in the blueprint that he has for you.
Yeah, definitely words of encouragement are so needed in the times we're in. And the worry and the fear and the anxiety and all that kind of stuff that you mentioned, a lot of people are experiencing that, especially those who don't know the Lord and kind of see where it's going. It can be a challenge for them. So that's great. And when do you expect that to come out?
When Faith Meets Fire, as of right now, it looks like we're releasing in September of this year.
Awesome. Very good. Okay, so where can people find out more about your books, your ministry, your podcast?
Yeah, it's funny because you said ministry, and at the beginning of the show, I said that an evangelist in ministry was not something that I wanted, and God has told me that I was wrong, and so I have a lot of different things that I'm doing now, including speaking like my dad did as an evangelist, which has been a lot of fun. So you can find out about me and everything that I'm doing. The best place is going to be wesleyfarnsworth.com/start, and there I've got links to everything that I'm doing, and then if you drop your name and email address in the form there, I have some freebies that I put together specifically for podcast listeners that I'll email you over as a thank you for signing up. And then by signing up, you'll get updates on anything that I have coming up.
Awesome. Okay. One final question for you.
Yeah.
What's the one thing you would tell people about God?
The one thing that I tell people, and I do this, and if you hear nothing else from this episode, I want you to hear this. Okay. It does not matter who you are, what you've done, what's been done to you, or what other people have said about you. You are not defined by those things. You are defined only by who you say you are, and more importantly, who God says you are, and that is that you are his child and that he loves you. And if nothing else matters, that matters. So trust in him. He's with you.
Amen. I agree 100%. And that's what he's come to do, is give us new life and life more abundantly. So be encouraged by those words from Wesley and take a look at what he has to offer if you're listening today, and check it out. God has a plan for your life too. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Wesley. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and God bless you in all you do for him.
Thanks, Johnny, for having me on. It's been a pleasure, blessing to be with you.
Amen to that.
What I am. If you ask, can someone beat the odds time and time again? What's the use of running to win if the future's all laid out and we just labor within? To those who endure till the end, crown of life shall be placed upon their head. Living proof is what I am. If you ask, can a heart be broken and rebuild once again? What's the use? I've asked myself too, but the promise of a better time keeps me pressing through. The greater the battle to be won, the greater the victory when we overcome. And I've had my share of trials, tests, and cares, but love has come and brought me out from there. To go and shine a light, to stand and speak the truth, to go and show our world, live and prove. I see the mountain cast into the sea, and I can do all things through the one who strengthens me. And I have had my share of trials, tests, and cares, but love has come and brought me out from there. To go and shine a light, to stand and speak the truth, to go and show our world. And I've had my share of trials, tests, and cares, but love has come and brought me out from there. To go and shine a light, to stand and speak the truth, to go and show our world, live and prove.
I hope that you have enjoyed the last half hour. Thank you again to Refuge Ministries Canada for hosting the show. So until next time, may God richly bless you with peace, love, and happiness.
We at Refuge Ministries are so blessed by the success of Refuge Freedom Stories and podcasts. In addition, we focus on youth prison ministry, release kits, and many other diverse outreaches to the needs of our community. As a nonprofit, there are many costs involved, however, and we are asking for your support. Financial gifts can be made via our website at www.refugeministriescanada.com or by calling 519-701-0108. Your giving makes this work possible, and we thank you in advance for your support. That's 519-701-0108. God bless you.